ああ、道がつながってたのか。ってことはボス部屋に続くのは左側の道ね。おかげで迷わずに済んだ。予定は少し狂ったが。
I'm literally gonna wait for you. And I see you're gonna be like, nah, I'm not gonna like it. I'm just keep watching.
Just subscribe.
And you think the clip gonna cut right here, but it's not, because I'm still waiting for you to click that like button. And the subscribe and the post notification button.
So what if you lived in a world where your abilities were predetermined, and no matter what you did in terms of determination or hard work, your abilities would be capped and limited to that? And also, how would you feel if you had to accept the fact that there was nothing you could do about that, and you had to live your life with that limitation, regardless of whether it was good for you or bad for you? But then one day you stumble upon an opportunity that could change your life. Would you take it? Jeez, I'm starting to sound like an Eminem song.
Palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy.
But well, that's something that Jinwoo stumbles upon, and he decides to make a decision that will ultimately result in a manhwa becoming one of the most biggest anime to come out this year. We got a little anime called Solo Leveling.
Let's get it. So keeping yourself a fresh.
But now, before I go into the decision that Jinwoo made, I probably have to tell you how did Jinwoo stumble upon that opportunity, because I'm sure you would want it yourself, because who wouldn't want an opportunity to basically change their lives? Well, let me tell you a little bit about him. So basically what happens is, in Jinwoo's timeline, something interesting happens. Now, you know how in certain isekai or certain shows, a portal opens into another world, and basically you go into that world and you see a bunch of creatures and everything just changes, right? But usually the characters are stuck in that world, and that's pretty much it. So they have to become a bit accustomed to that life. Well, solo leveling is a bit different, because essentially what happens is that an incident happened in which basically a bunch of portals will open around the world, and what will happen is that we're kind of being invaded by a bunch of weird monsters, and if we don't take the initiative to go fight them, then they come out and they'll try and kill everybody. And also they get more stronger if you don't stop them. So there's an initiative for everybody to go into that portal and fight these monsters and return. It's basically like a weird reverse isekai where you go into that world, you can fight these monsters, but then you come back if you win. If you don't, yeah, you can kind of guess what happens when people fight monsters and they lose. So there's kind of an initiative to make sure that you survive and also come back home. But then something different happens. So because of this portal system, an economy is developed in that there's now a sort of job that you can get. But the thing is, to kind of do certain jobs, you need a ranking. So to be able to do a certain job, you need to be of a certain level, whether that's A rank, B rank, C rank, and so on and so on and so on. Just like any sort of game, you're kind of told beforehand what type of level of monsters you'll have to deal with when you enter that world. But I'm assuming earlier onwards, that limitation probably wasn't there, which means that a lot of people died because of that.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by that.
But now this brings us back to our individual Jinwoo. Now Jinwoo is ranked the lowest. He is a E rank, which means that he is just barely good enough to enter portals.
Loser! You're a loser!
In that basically he needs to have somebody always holding his hand for him to go into a portal, because he is that weak, and monsters that are considered fodder are the most difficult to him. Honestly, I saw him fight a goblin, and that goblin was giving him hands. He almost died. I've never seen an individual fight that hard against one goblin, and it was like the most sacrificial type of dub I've ever seen in my life, where he got stabbed up and then just beat one goblin while the rest of his crew is just easily killing them. It was actually pretty sad if you think about it. But the thing is, with Jinwoo, you start to develop a certain affection for him, because while he's struggling and you're asking yourself, why is he doing this? Because remember, this is actually a job. The world is still pretty normal. He could get a job anywhere, like he could work at McDonald's for all we know. So you see him struggle in a lot of fights and you ask yourself, what is his motivation? Because he gets messed up so badly in fights that it's actually pretty sad. But then you learn that his mother fell ill and he has a sister who's reliant on him. So he's basically doing this as a way to sustain his family, because without him, his sister wouldn't be able to go to school and his mom wouldn't be able to maintain a hospital life because she's in a coma. So it's not looking so good. So once you learn that, you start to realize that he is in a pretty desperate position, which is why he gets himself into these bad places, but he's so determined to try and make something of himself. Until one day, he goes into a certain dungeon with a party of which is filled with individuals that he kind of knows, but everybody basically looks at him as a signal of safety, because as long as he's there, it means that the cave is relatively easy. Until they stumble into a dungeon that had another kind of dungeon within it.
You triggered my trap card! Power balance!
Welcome to the dungeon.
Kissing and hope they cut us, whether they like it or not. I wanna show you up.
And then everything just gets turned into a basic survival game. If you've ever watched Saw or just any horror movie in which individuals are forced to quickly learn a game to survive, it's pretty much like that.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Where ultimately Jinwoo is abandoned, and once he's there basically asking himself if he made the right decisions because he's about to die, and having to come to peace with the fact that no one is going to take care of his family, was pretty sad to see. But in that moment of desperation and him being heroic, he gets rewarded with a weird opportunity where he finds himself in the hospital the next day. He's healed from every deadly injury he had. I mean, he lost limbs, but they're back again. But when they try to scan him to see his level of power, in that maybe he had an awakening, which resulted in him surviving such a deadly situation, he's still a E rank. And once they find out that he's not that powerful, they lose interest. But within the hospital, he starts to find these weird tasks that he has to do. And, well, if he doesn't do the tasks, he gets punished. But if he does do the task, he actually gains things, whether it be like random loot boxes or XP. And as he keeps doing these tasks, he gets powerful. So then, basically what happens after that is that he just goes on this mission to become super powerful and super strong. But his main motivation is still the same, it's his family. And because now he has the opportunity to improve and break the limitations that he had because of this mysterious ability that he has an opportunity to actually make a difference in his life and change things that he thought already determined for him. And you see his determination and hard work paying off with this ability that he has. So now you have this individual who already was pretty determined enough and was willing to work as hard as possible with no limitations. And ultimately, the sky's the limit to his abilities. And seeing this is pretty rewarding after you hear every single thing that he's been through. So at this point, you would think that everything has changed, everything is going to be awesome. In fact, he literally gets a glow up because of this ability.
Sung Jinwoo-san.
I got the slam, part of them. Shorty have me drip, proud of them. Put it on the jet, out of here. 2024, out here.
He grew taller, stronger, looks better, sounds different. Like, he gained everything, which is a pretty weird ability, and I wish I had it. But after all of this, you'd think that everything would change. Well, the thing about solo leveling is that because everybody treats dungeon exploring as a job, you have individuals who enter dungeons without the best of intentions. There's people who are interested in just making money, people who are interested in just capitalizing off the situation of resources from that type of place, or just people trying to become famous and rich because they want to be this famous dungeon explorer. But then also, just as how realistic life is, the people who also do these jobs can also be pretty bad. And Jinwoo discovers this pretty early because he's tossed into a situation where he's been abandoned in the first part before his glow up, but now he actually has to do something that a lot of people have never really experienced. I hope so. He has to kill a few people who set him up because, well, it's part of their thing. They set people up, get them into a pretty dangerous area, and because they're more higher ranked than the other individuals, they can easily kill them and make the most out of that situation, in which they will just basically act as if something bad happened. And that's the danger of a dungeon, in that basically you have this place where people are allowed to die and a lot of bad things can happen. And once the mission is complete, that dungeon closes and no one will be able to discover anything. It's basically this place where there are no normal rules and the strongest will survive. And well, unfortunately for those individuals who try to set up Jinwoo, it didn't go so well. He was able to do something that very few have been able to do. Actually, that's not very few. A lot of people get killed. But anyway, don't do that.
You guys make me sick to my stomachs, fam.
But basically, he is able to kill all of them, despite, of course, having to deal with the fact that he's never done this. He had to accept the reality of the world and the situation that he was tossed into. He had to do it to survive, and he did that. But something changes with him. He realizes that in his obsession and path to becoming powerful, he's gonna have to do a lot of things that people would consider pretty bad. And as the episodes pass, you realize that he's developing that mentality of becoming strong, in that, well, to become strong, you have to deal with strong individuals, whether that be good or bad people, but most of the time it's bad people. He might have to kill just to become stronger. And that is something that he quickly accepts, which is pretty messed up because he was a pretty good dude. So basically what happens is that you have this individual whose life was supposed to change. He has everything he's wanted in terms of powers and abilities, and he's developing, but also not too far that he's just this super powerful individual who can't lose a fight and he's basically immortal. Not really. He's still at a point where he has to grind. And in fact, there's still some challenges that he knows he can't beat. There was a situation where he tried to do that and it didn't go so well. So basically with Solo Leveling, you have this anime that is exploring an individual who has broken his limitations. And honestly, the sky is the limit, depending on how far he reaches and how hard he works, which is pretty rewarding because you're getting an individual whose powers and abilities are determined by how hard he works and also just how willing and brave he is to reach his goals. So that determination that made you fall in love with him is still there, but in a more dark and twisted way, because instead of him initially chasing a path to kind of feed his family, he's still doing that, but now it's more about him being power hungry in an effort to make sure that his family is pretty good and that everybody can live a happy life. But then the thing about Solo Leveling is that ultimately when you look at it from a bigger picture type of view, it can just seem as though it's a power fantasy. Basically, this individual who was considered a loser, so to speak, people laughed at him, people thought he was weak, is now on the path to becoming one of the most powerful people ever. So you could say that this is something that is generally an anime trope, especially with anime like shonen or whatever. But the thing with Solo Leveling is that it's pretty different. Yes, it is a power fantasy, and yes, it is awesome seeing this character who's been through so many bad things become so powerful, and he is now the person basically dishing out the bad stuff, whether it's good or bad, we'll see later. There's still something different about this anime. The fact that it's able to blend the realism of real life and also fantasy is amazing, but it's never really been explored that much in a fantasy realm, which this anime is doing. But also it's able to detach itself from the fantasy and take you back to the realism of the world. So essentially that tandem of the portal and real life is pretty interesting, because once you dive into the dungeon and you enter these places, you become someone else, you gain powers and everything is different. But then once you jump back into reality, you're just a normal person and what you're doing is just a job. So basically you're just like any other person who happens to have a skill and is able to do a certain job because of that skill. That's just basically how jobs are in real life. So you're not really that different from anybody who is normal, which is pretty cool. So this anime has the ability to do something pretty awesome, which it does pretty well, and also is pretty dark and twisted. It's nice to see someone who's been kicked so many times get their chance to kick back, and Jinwoo is not holding back because he's got a lot of bodies, and not the legal type. But of course, with the good comes the bad, because just as how I explained to you how this anime is super awesome, it can simply be downplayed to a power fantasy. It's just basically, ooh, I get stronger and everything's gonna change for me, which is kind of sometimes unrelatable, because unless you stumble into that dungeon, you're pretty much predestined to a certain degree to have the abilities that you have. So having a connection with it is kinda but also at the same time, you could be drawn to the anime because of that. So it's give or take to a certain degree. But I do understand that eventually Jinwoo's story is gonna be deemed played out, because at some point you're just gonna ask yourself, well, if he keeps getting stronger, there's gonna be a point where he's so strong that ultimately he ends up becoming a one-punch man. But reading the manhwa, I think that you'll find that a lot of interesting things are gonna happen. So with this anime, give it time. Even though it seems as though the story may not be the most captivating in the long run, I think that there's a lot of things that are going to be exposed that a lot of people are going to enjoy. So though it may be deemed as a power fantasy for now, there's a lot that's going to happen in the future that's going to be pretty awesome. And even if it is just a power fantasy, it's a pretty awesome power fantasy. So with this anime, what you're getting is a pretty interesting story. You're getting pretty good animation. Like, the animation is pretty stellar. I didn't actually expect the animation to be pretty good. So you have this good looking anime that does, well, the gory side of the anime justice, and how amazing it is and how graphic it can get. I mean, when you saw Jinwoo lose parts of his body, you believed it. So you have an anime that has a good story, has good animation, and also has pretty good music. I found it to be annoying initially, but the opening kind of grew on me, because there's just something grindy about that music. To play that opening song while you're playing a game like Elden Ring or something like that, you'll probably power up, because it's just something that makes you want to grind for XP when you hear that song. So you're getting an anime that is giving you the trifecta of awesomeness. So there's not much missing from this anime, and the fact that it's a manhwa means that it's doing something that hasn't been done in quite a while, and it's here to be the beacon of this is what happens when manhwa gets animated, which will also open an opportunity for other manhwa in the future. So it's a win-win situation. So ultimately, Solo Leveling is awesome, and it's become one of the best anime of the season. Now time will tell if it ends up being one of the best anime of the year, but I think that it has a good chance of doing that because of what it was able to do.